turns on the TV, pops a beer. His plan is to sleep for like 3 or 4 hours, get some food, and then go back to the station to keep working on the case. And he turns on the TV, and what does he see? The dating game. And that composite went out, and about an hour before Art left, they'd gotten a call from a parole officer working for the California Department of Corrections who saw the sketch and said, you got to check out a guy named Rodney Alcala. And Rodney Alcala had been convicted of kidnapping an 8-year-old girl back in 1968 named Tally Shapiro. She was walking to school, and he was a fugitive. They found him 4 years later working at an all-girls summer camp in Vermont. Imagine that. They extradite him after 4 years, and it was the scene was dramatic because a Good Samaritan happened to see him pick up this little girl in his car, and she was 8 years old with Mary Jane, those little white Mary Jane shoes, and she said, I'm not supposed to take rides from strangers. And he said, oh, it's okay. I know your parents. I'm not a stranger. So she got in the car. He drove her to his house, this little bungalow in Hollywood, and a Good Samaritan saw this. And the Good Samaritan followed this, didn't look right, and he found a payphone, because that's the days of payphones. He calls LAPD, and LAPD Officer Camacho showed up by himself. It's Camacho's very first day back on the job. He'd been shot in the Watts riots, and he'd been shot in Vietnam. He's in the Army in Vietnam, so the guy's been shot twice. And his first day back at work, he gets that call. And he arrives by himself, and he knocks on the door, and the guy inside says, well, I'm in the shower. Let me just put some clothes on. And about 2 seconds go by, and I've talked to Camacho about this, and I think I can swear in this, right? Okay? All right. I don't want to offend anybody. There's this word that maybe you haven't heard of. And he goes, fuck that shit. I'm kicking in the door. So he does, and you got naked running guy out the back, and he looks down, and he's got dying little girl on the kitchen floor. So what does he do? He does exactly the right thing. He pulls this barbell off of her neck that she'd also been raped with, imagine that, and heroically saves her life. But the downside is, bad guy got away. In the house, however, they find thousands of photographs of people in rooms, people in the woods, people in the wilderness, all in the possession of Rodney James Alcala. Okay, so Alcala goes to New York, changes his name to John Berger. He had graduated from UCLA Film School. Okay, he had a genius level IQ, and this guy was like a photographic prodigy, and for the time, a very handsome man, right? So he's got charm. Well, he was at Cantwell High School. He's on the yearbook committee. Got a varsity letter in cross country. He had friends. He had girlfriends. Genius level IQ, and a mother who loved him. Not Buffalo Bill. So they extradite him. He comes in, and the DA. I'm a big supporter of law enforcement, obviously, and I'm a big supporter of most prosecutors. But this person looks at this case, and this will bother me until my dying day, gave him a simple child molest, despite all of those facts and evidence. Rodney Alcala went to state prison in California and was paroled, get this, after 34 months. Cautionary tale. When you hear people talk about criminal justice reform, keep that in mind. Okay, so Art Droz sees this, and he gets back to the station, and the same Good Samaritan that called in the Tally Shapiro case saw the composite and called it in too. So now they've got two people saying, look at Rodney Alcala. So they get a search warrant, they put it together, and they find this is his mother's house where he was living. This is his Datsun B210 station wagon. This car is still in the storage at the Huntington Beach Police Department right now. buried with other stuff, but it's still there. And there's something really cool about that I'll tell you. So they get in, and the carpet has been torn out and replaced with like shag carpeting. The windows, if you look, are tinted long before it became fashionable to tint your windows. And inside the car, there are binoculars and all sorts of things that basically make it, there's maps, binoculars, tinted windows. I mean, it's funny when we look at those old cars to see how small they were. That's Craig Robeson, Judge Robeson now, there in the garage, serving the search warrant. Now they get in there, and the way it works with warrants is you're only allowed to take what the judge gives you permission to take. So in the warrant, they asked for instrumentality of the crime, things with blood on it, anything that might relate back to Robin Samsoe, and they don't find a thing. But what they do find, or what they see, is they see a receipt for a storage locker from Seattle. And Craig Robeson, I love this man, and genius that he is, he sees that, and he's not allowed to take it, but because it's in plain view, he's allowed to write down the information on the storage locker. So he writes down the address, storage locker number, all that kind of stuff. They go back to the station, and they bring Rodney in, they arrest him, and his sister came in, and they catch this, they put him in a room together, and there's a phone in between them that's wired for sound. And they have this whole conversation in Spanish, which in Huntington Beach may as well be English, because most police actually can speak it, and they listen in real time as he says, hey, you've got to get up to my storage locker and empty it out for me. Okay, so they hear this, and it becomes this race between Rodney Alcala's sister and the police. They get up there first, they get into the storage locker, and they find a little silk pouch filled with jewelry. Now, you guys know what that is, right? Okay, so one of the fascinating things, and there's a bunch of fascinating things about serial killers, one of the things is they love to represent themselves. Okay, and I think it's about control. They can't resist. They think they're smarter than everybody anyway, right? And they often don't have much faith in their legal counsel. But the idea for those guys to be able to take control of the courtroom is like a siren song. So they love to represent themselves, but along the way, they love to collect trophies and keepsakes of their victims. It's almost like they go to school for it, because you see that as a pattern over and over and over again. So they find this. Craig immediately knows what this is, that this is a trophy case. And in addition to that, Robin Samsoe had been wearing little gold ball earrings at the time she went missing. And sure enough, in that pouch, there are little gold ball earrings that her mother identifies as being hers. But this is 1979, so this is long before DNA. The earrings get handled over and over again. And when we tested them years later, there was no DNA found on those earrings. But in addition to that, we find all of these photos. Now, the thousands of pictures that were taken from his bungalow in Hollywood all disappeared. They were collected in evidence, and somewhere along the way, LAPD and LADA and all that, somebody cleaned out the box room one day, and they were lost. Okay, so this is a brand new batch, 10 years later, and we found hundreds and hundreds of these photos. And hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. Look at this. So summer, that's 78 or 79 for sure. That's Southern California. And that little girl is all by herself with Rodney Alcala. And there's a bunch more where they're inside, various stages of nudity, sometimes performing different sex acts. Look at this. This photo is actually one of a sequence, which is creepy as hell because it's far, far away and then a little closer and a little closer. It's like a scene from Jaws. We have no idea who these people are or if they're still alive. Okay, so here are the gold ball earrings that were recovered. And there were also a second set that were more manly. Rodney Alcala insisted that the gold ball earrings that he had belonged to him, whatever. They also find this photo. This is a young woman named Lori Wirtz. She's 15 years old. And she took a diary that summer. She was keeping a diary. And this photo was released because they were trying to find this girl. And a friend of hers' mom called police and said, "That's Lori Wirtz." So she'd been keeping a diary. That was the same day in Huntington Beach that Rodney Alcala, or that Robin Samsoe disappeared. And if you look at that, behind her, you see those trees and the signs and the shadows, okay? Those become important. Okay, so I'll come back to that. So they're able to place Rodney Alcala at the beach that day, and he gets prosecuted for the murder of Robin Samsoe. He's convicted. He's sentenced to death. And it goes up to the California Supreme Court, and the presiding justice back in those days was a woman named Rose Bird, who was an avowed ideologically opposed to the death penalty, and she took great pride in pronouncing to all of her friends that she had never affirmed a death penalty case in her time on the Supreme Court. She was eventually recalled because it infuriated even my wacky state of California. It was too much for the voters, and they recalled her. And so case gets prosecuted again, this time by a guy named Tom Goethals, was a prosecutor, who's now an appellate judge in Orange County. But a lot of the evidence that was introduced in the first trial was not allowed in the second trial. So it's been really streamlined a lot. Okay, so the way it works is it's called law of the case. And when a case gets reversed on the appellate process, you can't use any of the evidence that was disapproved of. Okay, so Tom goes in, tries the case in 1986, retries Rodney Alcala with half the evidence. It winds up going through the California Supreme Court, no problem. Then it gets up to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. They take it, and there are panels on the Ninth Circuit, just like Rose Bird, who take great pride on never having affirmed a death penalty verdict. So it gets reversed again. And now it is 2002. I, having been 12 years old then, I've gone to college, gone to law school, gone through the DA's office, and it lands on my desk. Okay. And I go in, and my boss at the time was a guy named Lou Rosenblum, who was my mentor, living legend in the prosecution world. And Lou, I'm like, what do we do with this? Now, I can't use any of the new evidence that has been disapproved of. So the original case has now been gutted twice. And I'm like, what do I do with this? I got a composite that I think is very convincing. And I got Lori Wirtz, but all of this other evidence, including 4 suspected murders in New York, shocking, right? And all this other evidence that was admitted in the first trial, I can't touch any of it. So, and I love this, Lou leans back, and again, he was just swearing. He goes, some of these people, and he'd done a whole tour in homicide, he did 67 murders, he won every single one of them. So it's impossible. He did it in 12 years. Leans back and he goes, some of these guys are so evil, I would rather they beat me than ever agree to them being released. And then he looks at me and he goes, if I were you, I would say, fuck that guy. So I think I'm going to take a run at it no matter what, right? So I find a guy in the Navy, a Navy expert on the sun, and those things exist, okay, who is able to look at those shadows and give me an exact time that photo was taken, which made Rodney Alcala perfectly in Huntington Beach exactly when he needed to be. And the Court of Appeal reversed it because his previous lawyer didn't introduce a BS alibi defense that he was supposedly at Knott's Berry Farm. So I've got this, I got my Navy guy, I've got Lori Wirtz, and I've got that composite, and I'm ready to roll. And then DNA catches up to Rodney Alcala. And we start getting DNA hits from people in Los Angeles County, from old unsolved murders from the mid-'70s, beginning with this woman, Charlotte Lamb, who was one of the many women that moved to LA to pursue a career in acting and modeling. And this woman, based on all of meeting her family and all of her neighbors, she was more beautiful on the inside than she was on the outside. And she had a neighbor who I put on to talk about when she left her apartment the night she was murdered. And this man was, in the days before computers, he would have been a gamer today. And I can say that because I embarrassingly play way too many video games myself. But he was this really sort of not too social, just kind of a nerdy guy. And she was so nice to him, she would always invite him out because she thought he seemed lonely. And this man, 30 years later on the stand, broke down in tears when he was talking about Charlotte Lamb. Jill Barcombe was 18 years old, and I'm going to show one graphic photo here. And it's not too bad. I think you guys can handle it. She came out from New York when she was 18. Family who loved her, again, moved to Hollywood to pursue her dreams. And she was found on a fire road. Yep, sorry. I think you guys can take it. The rock on the right was used to smash in her face. Okay, she had been raped repeatedly, and spermatozoa, technical word, was found in every single orifice of her body. Georgia Wickstead was a pediatric cancer nurse. Talk about contributing to the world. She's 27 years old, had just moved out of her home for the first time. She'd been living with her parents. I took that one, I took the scene out, but brutally murdered, raped with a hammer. There's the hammer. And Jill Parenteau. Jill Parenteau was a computer programmer in Burbank who was found in her apartment after going to a place called the Handlebar Saloon in Pasadena. Okay, so we get these. Her jewelry box was open as well, which was significant. Okay, this is a little graphic. Again, no faces here. But when these are our 4 victims, their ligature marks and bite marks on their breasts were almost identical every single time. Okay, so that we had, because of the passage of time, we had no DNA on Jill Parenteau. Not everything had been thrown away from Burbank, but her screen was cut on the left side, just like Georgia Wickstead. Now, here is my guy in court. We're not supposed to take pictures in a courtroom. This is my not so awesome photography skills. Because Rodney Alcala, being a true blue serial killer, decided he would represent himself. So I would have to go into court and deal with this guy every single day for the better part of a year. And my co-counsel from Los Angeles, a woman I love to death, Gina Satriano is her name, we teamed up. So the LA County prosecutions and the Orange County prosecution, we would do it all together. And she didn't want to deal with him, of course. She's like, what do we do now? He's fired his lawyer. Like, I don't want to talk to this guy. And being, for some of you know me, probably way too damaged by all this work and completely twisted, I couldn't wait. So I've got this weird back and forth with this guy because he's a genius, and it is like this duel of I'm trying to get him to cooperate in his execution, which is bizarre, and he's trying to manipulate and charm everybody in the courtroom into us basically making a mistake and letting him go. Here he is taking the stand, which was fantastic because it was one of the most surreal things I've ever seen. He would ask, attorney-client would ask client, Rodney Alcala, questions. Rodney Alcala, what do you think, blah, blah, blah. Well, Rodney, that's a great question. And I'm watching this, and it was amazing. And the jury is watching, they're looking at me, and it's like, is this actually happening? And then one day, they're leading him into the courtroom. This is one of my favorite days. And the deal I had with Gina was, look, what we'll do to make this process move along, I will do my best. I'll be his buddy. And every time we've got to tell him no, let's just tap into his misogyny. I'll blame you, right? So I'd go in, and we had to tell him no all the time. Like, Rod, buddy, look, I don't know why she won't allow it, but she said no, so I don't know what her problem is today. Okay, Matt, I understand. You're doing your best. So he's coming down the hallway one day, and this is a famous serial killer. One of the prisoners in the back hallway gets to him, headbutts him, and spits on him. Okay, right. So he shows up, and he's like, we can't do anything today. And I'm like, you know, Rodney, since you've been in prison, we've got this thing called cell phones. And we have cameras on the phones. Let me snap a photo of that because you're going to want to make sure this is part of the record. So Rodney pulls his hair back. I take that photo, the mouse on his forehead, which was a good one, and I'm texting it to all the detectives in the back row. Shockingly, I may have forgotten to actually put it on the record. Shucks. But there was a lot of media on the case, for sure. And Rodney wound up giving his closing argument, and he got up and he played the song Alice's Restaurant by Arlo Guthrie. And he said, you know, ladies and gentlemen, if you convict me of death, you'll be just like the guy in the song. For those of you who don't know it, it's a protest song from Vietnam. You know, it was, again, one of the most surreal things I've ever seen. And then I get up and finally I get to take my mask off and I blast him. And I let the jury know exactly what I think of him. And I'm pointing my finger at him. And he at one point sticks his bony finger at me when I'm done and says, "You played fast and loose with the facts." And right at that moment, I laughed at him. I hear the click of a camera in the courtroom. I'm like, oh no. And Orange County Register runs an article the next day. DA Matt Murphy laughs at accused serial killer Rodney Alcala. And then the LA Times says, next day, DA Matt Murphy shares a laugh with serial killer. I got hate mail from Ireland from a guy saying I was a disgrace to the entire Murphy name. So here are my 5 victims. And with Jill Parenteau, the way it works is I've got to convince the DA's office in LA, like right when we got the DNA hits. LA is a different jurisdiction. Okay, so it's a different county. And up to that point in the state of California, there was a jurisdictional defense. You can only do 1 murder per county. So for a serial killer, they could go, if you did 5 murders, you'd have to do 5 different trials. So we challenged that. There was a brand new code section called 790, and we took it all the way to the California Supreme Court to bring them all down together. But the deal I had to make with Steve Cooley, who was the elected DA, who's a wonderful prosecutor, I had to go convince this guy I'd never met before to let me try their LA cases in Orange County. And Jill Barkham, there was DNA all over the place, Georgia Wickstead, Charlotte Lamb, DNA all like replete. But the DNA on Jill Parenteau had been thrown away. So I'm like, look, give me that one and I'll win that one too. And he agreed. So when it came down to the guilt phase, the real nitty gritty, before we went in, I had all the evidence retested. And Robin's mother had been dragged through the fire with all the appeals and all of the cross-examinations over all the different pretrial hearings of the 2 previous convictions. She'd been called a liar more times than anybody I've ever met about those being Robin's earrings, right? In the appellate stage, in the trial stage, by good lawyers, bad lawyers. This woman had been through the ringer and her life was over. She never recovered from the grief of what happened to her daughter. And when we submitted all of those items, nothing had any DNA on them except for 1 tiny little rose earring. We had 0.06 nanograms of Charlotte Lamb's DNA. Amazing. And that earring, the uncontroversial earring, sat on some evidence locker for over 3 decades with that earring. And I got to argue, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if there's a heaven. I don't know if there's a hell. I've never been particularly religious. I don't know. But I do know that if there is an afterlife, Charlotte Lamb was waiting for Robin Samsoe the day she died. And I know that Charlotte Lamb was with us in that courtroom that day. And she was screaming to that jury, Robin's mother was always right. Jury came back. They convicted on everything. But before that happened, Rodney wanted his owner's manual from his car. And remember, Parenteau, which I love, Jill Parenteau was at the Handlebar Saloon. So my lead detective from Huntington at the time, Patrick Ellis, awesome police officer, he goes and he digs out Rodney Alcala's car, literally, like they've got to move all these boxes, and he finds the contents of the glove box that's still there in a plastic bag, and he's like, okay, comes back into court, and he's like, all right, I got good news and bad news. Good news is I found his stupid frickin' owner's manual for whatever reason that he wanted. And he goes, and the bad news is all bad for Rock and Rodney because I also found this. And he pulls out a matchbook from his glove box from the Handlebar Saloon in Pasadena. So her family was there every single day, all of them. They had families there every single day. And we got to deliver justice to all of them. And Rodney Alcala went up to California death row, and he eventually came down with dementia. And when we released all those photos found in his storage locker, we started getting calls from detectives all across the United States, including Wyoming, New York, Marin, a bunch of other places. And we were able to solve a ton of additional murders. Rodney Alcala died by himself in a cold prison cell in the state of California, being watched by CDC guards with his feet hanging over the edge of the bed, and those families got justice.